Welcome in, everybody. Today we're talking about Kefka, who has arrived very early in War of the Visions Global, and I don't even know how they did it. Where did they even find him? How did they get him from the code into the other part of the code? I didn't know Gumi was capable of this type of stuff. But we'll get to that. First, we're going to talk about his kit, his stats. We'll talk about comparisons, equipment, and even take a sneak peek at the Japanese meta. And hopefully with all of this information, you'll be able to decide whether or not you actually want to pull for Kefka with that FFVIIR that you don't have when he releases on Wednesday. But first, let's talk about this surprise banner that we've been saddled with. Kefka is 4 weeks early, and we might have expected a 1 week discrepancy after we had Reagan bundled with his Vision card on the exact same week. But this collab announcement is remarkably early for Global. It means that we've had Final Fantasy VII, Fullmetal Alchemist, and Final Fantasy VI all back to back. Now, this has ended up not being such a big deal for me because, as we can see, I have a lot of FFVIIR. Why? Because I've been incredibly lucky with my pulls. Like, honestly, if you've been watching my streams, you know that I have been very lucky, and I am very thankful for that. However, there's lots of players that haven't been as lucky. There's been plenty of players that have had to pity many units recently, and a lot of 100 cost units to go with that. So it's a really stressful time to be releasing another collab this early. And I can't help but think that at the end of the day, this is a money grab technique. This is a way for us to have to spend because Gumi is bringing back, in my eyes, the most popular Final Fantasy collab. Now, I know Final Fantasy VII is incredibly popular, but I think that Final Fantasy VI is right up there too. And a lot of people are not just going to want to pull for Kefka, the new unit, but they may not have gotten Celis the first time around. Maybe they didn't build up their lock and they're going to spend some FFVIIR to do that. Whatever it is, there's all of these units all coming at the same time right after these other two collabs, and it really doesn't feel right to me. I think it's just too soon. Imagine if I had pulled for Bradley. Now, I pulled for Bradley because I did so well on Roy. So imagine I pulled for Bradley thinking, okay, well, I can do this. And I did actually pull for him expecting, well, I can pity him because I'm going to have the 5 weeks until Kefka arrives and I'll be able to get back up to another pity again. However, let's say I actually had pitied Bradley. I would not be at this level of FFVIIR right now. I would be unable to pull Kefka. And that would be a huge, huge disappointment. Not just because he's a really cool villain and a very cool character, but because I'm a fire main. And now here comes this awesome fire unit and I'm unable to pull for him. So, I mean, again, I'm very lucky to be in the position that I am, but I can only imagine how other players might be completely strapped for FFVIIR right now. And this is just the worst timing for them. And in case you were wondering, we were due for a lull. So this was a big surprise for a lot of people. We were supposed to get a run of non-limited things before this happened. We did get half of that. We got the Stern and the Reagan banners, but this is just this is a big shocker, and to be honest, I'm not super impressed with it. But I'm curious how everybody else feels. Maybe, you know, there's some people that say, well, you know what, Gumi's got to make some money to keep this game going, and maybe this is the direction they had to do it. But you know, hey, to each their own for their opinion. I'm not a big fan, but I'm curious to hear what you guys think. All right, so back to the should you pull. We're going to start with the AI test, and I have some footage that I got from Kefka on the JP version, and we're going to see he's going to do some attacking first because he is an attacker primarily, but in a second here, we'll get to see which buff he would use first. So here we go, and this is his TMR ability. It gives 40% magic up and then 25% agility to both himself and the people that get hit by this buff. So he uses his TMR over his on-kit ability, which is also a group ability. So we'll see kind of what happens next. We got to take care of this guy first though. And then we're going to see right here, this is the Show Me Your Strength. This buff gives 20 spirit, 20 AoE resistance to both Kefka and to his allies, but the allies also get hate. So they are more likely to be targeted than Kefka. So that's pretty interesting that he will use those TMR buffs, or at least his own TMR buff, before he uses that one. Now, we're not going to get to see it on this fight, but the next thing he would use, just because it's the only buff left on his kit, is going to be his re-raise buff. But how about if he didn't have any allies around? All right, so here's a Kefka with nobody around to buff, and we're going to see what he does first. Okay, so that is the re-raise buff. So he will actually use that over his team buff if there are no allies in range. And just for consistency's sake, we'll see what he gets up to at the end here after this attack. And there he's using his TMR buff again. So the order still applies. We're going to see if he has allies within range. He uses his own TMR, followed by his Show Me Your Strength buff that's on his kit, and then his re-raise. However, if he doesn't have any allies around, he will use his re-raise first, and then he would follow up with his TMR, and then followed by the Show Me Your Strength. All right, so now we're going to talk about a lot of the pros for Kefka, and we'll look at our little scouting reports to do this, starting with the damage. So Kefka has a super high magic stat. It's partially because when you see it on the screen here, because of the Energist passive that gives for the first 5 turns a lot of stats, but he also has another magic buff on his passives as well that you're definitely going to be using. So all of this means is that he has a super high magic stat, and he also has a pretty high magic attack modifier when you factor in that you're going to be using his vision card for the most part with him. And upon his re-raise activating, he actually gets a CT up buff, but also a 60% magic buff. It means that he's going to do really big damage against anybody that does not have a high magic resistance, and that is because he only has 10% magic resist penetration on his kit, but more on that later. So for the magic resist metas, Roy's VC is going to be very, very important. But in the short term, I think we're actually going to be okay, because when you rattle off some of these units here, we've got Sephiroth, 0% magic resistance, Halloween Lucia, 0%, Dark Fina, 15%. Even that's not that high. Little Leela, 5%, Bradley, 10%, Queen Mashery, 5%, Oberon is -10%. Glaciella, the wind one, is 10%. Joom is -5. Edward is -5. Riesel, 10%. Sadly, 15. Starlight Elena, 10. Jaden, 10. Lightster, -5. And then Alphonse Elric, 5. Lightning from Final Fantasy 13 is 20%. But really, we're seeing low magic resistance across the board with a lot of different units. Now, I didn't name every single meta unit in existence, but basically, if you're not a dedicated magic tank, you generally don't have very high magic resistance. And it's not like slash resistance where we see people building against it widely. So I think that he's actually going to be in an okay spot a lot of the time. However, when he does run into people with high magic resistance, maybe their Esper is giving them some, maybe they have a piece of equipment that gives them some, or whatever it is, Trust Stones are giving them some, he will see reduced damage because his penetration is so low. I should also mention for him damage-wise that barriers will be effective against him unless people get close to him, because his only barrier break is on the Energist sub-job, and it's only a 2-square range. He also can't deal with Shell, but if you bring along Roy, he will be able to dispel Shell for Kefka. As for durability, Kefka's got pretty good HP for a caster. Specifically, he's still, a lot further below Bradley and Stern and Sephiroth, but he's not bad. He also has innate defense and spirit, which is always nice to see. Once he is transcended, he's going to have innate 20 AoE resistance, and he gets another 20% from a buff. Now, he also gives that buff to his allies, and that's something that I knocked with Lightstern, that his only AoE resistance was on a buff. Now, Kefka obviously has it innately as well, but also Kefka's buff gives hate to his allies, so that really helps that AoE resistance come in handy. It helps him avoid things like dispels, so it is a better situation than what I was describing with Stern. So that buff is also going to give 20 spirit, so then at that point, we're looking at a pretty high amount of spirit as well. It's a very, very strong buff that you're for sure going to want to have Kefka using, and you'll want to take advantage of when you're trying to tune your team on guild battle defense or offense. He also has re-raise, he has physical reflex specifically, and if you have him with a tank or a pair of bruisers, he should be pretty durable. When we take a look at utility for Kefka, his main points are going to be around debuffing his opponents. So high confusion chance on that LB is going to be really great when you take somebody out of the fight momentarily with a confused debuff, but he also has access to poison on his counter, although I think I would probably use physical reflex instead. Silence and blind are on his sub job, which seems pretty specific. Maybe if you're running fire evade, or if you're coming up against magic casters, you might want to use that. It also has an AoE in a decent range, although it does have a casting time, so it's an interesting skill to use, but you still might want that Energist sub-job instead for the different attack type, and also for the ability to use missile attacks rather than magic attacks. He also has access to a Spirit Break, and his Light of Judgment attack is pretty interesting in that it breaks the target's attack, magic, and agility. So agility breaks are very important, very powerful in War of the Visions. It's a very large AoE as well, so you could agility break the entire team. Sadly though, it has a 200 cast time, which is very slow. It's the slowest you see in the game. We do see that his global upgrades for the vision card address his cast time. Maybe that's going to make this skill a little bit better, because from what I saw in JP, sometimes the right thing to do, depending on your opponent, was just to turn that skill off. So he can also dispel re-raise. That comes with a 100% counter chance reduction, which is really nice to see. And he has some match 2 healing potential with the calculator sub, but I'd still rather use Energist or his own sub job. He has the large starting AP value, which means AP economy is not going to be an issue for Kefka. We're going to talk about some cons here, but before I do, I just wanted to mention my channel membership, because I am actually putting up 1 member video per week. So if you want to get extra videos from me, I've been putting up like arena fights, guild battle testing, and even some thoughts on where I want to go with my channel and other things like that. So every week I'm going to put out a member video, and if you want to check that out, you can become a channel member. Okay, so cons. There's definitely a few. He has the 10% magic resist pen, and he's not going to get any from his gloves, because you're likely going to be using his event gloves. They give a lot of extra stuff. They don't have any magic pen. Unfortunately, they just have the spirit pen. So he does have really low magic resist penetration. We can talk more about the gloves in a bit, but he also has poor slash resistance, which is something that's kind of important right now. His barrier break has very low range, so he can get kind of stuck that way. The Light of Judgment has 200 speed cast time, and he has cast times in general on his kit. Some instant cast though, and then lower accuracy with no 100% hits. So maybe the global buff is going to fix those last 2 points, because he gets accuracy, because he gets Light of Judgment. He gets cast time increase. So maybe he's going to be able to fix those 2 things. Those were problems for him in JP. They made him ultimately a unit in JP that's not seen a ton. When we look at the comparisons for Kefka, he looks really good. I'm looking at my screen right now, and man, these stats are huge. But again, consider that hyper vitality buff that's going to be giving him a ton of magic, dexterity, and agility. It actually puts his accuracy into what used to might have been a respectful range, but at this point it's actually kind of low compared to the high accuracy units that we have. But here you can see he's got a pretty good amount of HP compared to Roy. He's got very high magic attack, very good agility when he has that buff up, and then the 17 defense and the 8 spirit. So what he looks to be, to me, is going to be a very high power mage, compared to some of these other units. Although, you know, Roy's no low power mage either, but he's going to trade off because he'll have some trouble against units that are evasive, but he's also going to have things like, you know, he doesn't deal with healers and tanks that well because of the lack of penetration and the lack of healing power down. When you put him together with Roy, all of a sudden you are in a better spot. You're using the VC from Full Metal Alchemist, and you have Roy covering some of those niches like Shell, like healing power down, that Kefka doesn't, and they can kind of fill in for each other's gaps. Next, we'll talk about some equipment, and we'll start with the farmable item, which are Kefka's gloves. And for him specifically, he gets magic attack 15, increase human killer 10 for magic attacks, and then AoE resistance 8, as well as spirit penetration 20. So this becomes very strong for him. The fact that you get AoE resistance on a weapon is just so good. I really like this, and you know, other items will give you magic attack, but not the human killer. He gets both of them. I think that you would use this on him just because of all of those bonuses there. You could hypothetically use the 20 magic pen gloves if you really wanted to, but you would be losing out on 25% modifier from that, and you wouldn't get the AoE resistance either. You could lose the spirit pen. That wouldn't be the biggest deal in the world, but at the end of the day, I think he's going to be fine with these, but we always have those magic pen gloves if we really need them. So what we're looking at here too with these different versions is honestly just building that magic version. If you want the aim for accuracy, you're better off just going full on into it and building something like an Alex ring or some other items that have more accuracy than 14. It's not worth it. The critical version is also something that I'm not that into. There is some critical support on some fire cards, but at the end of the day, I think you just want to stack his magic up, and that's going to be just fine. So you can just build a magic version for your Kefka. In terms of his TMR, they're very good. You know, just a nice staple TMR because they're accessories, an accessory with agility on it. That just makes it really good. The 2 cast buff gives magic and agility up. Anything that gives agility is very powerful as well. So overall, this is a very solid TMR. It doesn't have an incredibly broken effect, but it is going to definitely see use. And I think new players, you've got yourself a very, very good TMR. We also have the Trial of Reckoning equipment here, and it's Kefka's vest or jacket or whatever the heck this is. And there's 2 good versions of it. So you have a defense, you know, version and a barrier spirit version. You know, either one could be good. Obviously, you get more value for the barrier 18 spirit version. But what's interesting is the effects here, where all the Final Fantasy VI units get 20 accuracy, 10 human killer, and then crit evasion 20 is for everybody, and magic resistance 10 for everybody. So for new players, this is a really good item for anyone to give you all these stats. But then for, you know, experienced players, these actually kind of drop off a little bit, because at the end of the day, that accuracy doesn't stack with like an Alex ring, which is what you'll be using on most of these units. So it's not like the best thing in the world for accuracy, but also the human killer is good. I love those other ones that have the human resistance. The human killer is kind of interesting too with Kefka, in that I think this stacks with his gloves, because his gloves are human killer for magic attacks, and this is just human killer. So for him, it does give him some offense, defense, and that's all fine. Like, so this is definitely like a suitable item for these units. I just actually don't even think it's best in slot a lot of the time. So it's kind of a so-so item, but again, you should always farm these things, because when you farm Trial of Reckoning, if you build this, great, and you might use it, but if you don't build it, you have a bunch of mats. And those mats are so important for future Trial of Reckonings and for future crafting in general. So it's always good to farm, and we can kind of look at to see if there's maybe something I'm missing with this piece, but I'm not super big on it. All right, so we should take a look at Kefka's vision card. It is limited, and it is very interesting. So this covers the job warrior, the category warrior, which King Mont is in and Sorrow is in. It also has Ninja Blade, so there's Yuffie for fire, and then it has the devout staff category, which gives you Minwu, and finally the glove category, which gives you both Roy and Kefka. So ton of fire units can use this card, but then again, they only use certain parts of the party effects. So the attack, the magic attack 42 is specifically going to be for those magic attackers, Roy, Kefka, and maybe Minwu sometimes. That is a huge amount of magic attack. That's similar to the Sephiroth VC that gave 42 slash attack. Definitely going to go to good use with him. And the other effects here are good for everybody. So increased defense 12 and 25% HP. It makes this into a very strong sub card, because you'll still get a lot of that HP, but you also still get some magic attack. So definitely a good sub card. The unit effects give the magic up and the missile resistance up, which is good to see. The global effects give accuracy and cast time reduction for Kefka, and hopefully those values are going to be really huge to solve his accuracy issue and to solve his his cast time issues. So otherwise, with this card, do I recommend it? For fire players, absolutely. For Kefka, based on the global effects, it's most likely going to be necessary for him to bring his maximum potential out, because this is such a good card in terms of the jobs that it's serving for fire. Yeah, I think that a lot of people might pull for this, but if you are not interested in any of these job categories, obviously then it's pretty easy to skip. The one thing you have to worry about is that it's limited. So if there's any part of you that thinks you might use these job categories in the future, then you might want to pull for it. That's such a hard spot to get into, especially considering that half the job categories on here are physical, and this has the magic attack on it. I think a lot of players should feel comfortable skipping it. All right, so this is the part of the video where we talk about Kefka and the JP meta, and we're using warthevisionstats.com. So thank you, to the creators of that for this data. Now, in case you're not familiar, what this is a tracking across a bunch of days of how many times Kefka's been used, and I've set it to the top 50 guilds in the JP side. So we can see that, for example, in the last recorded day, that he was used in 41 teams on offense, and at his highest here, we were looking at 63 teams, and it's kind of fluctuated up and down from around there. In terms of defense, he was only used in 29 teams, which makes sense. He's harder to use on defense, and at his highest, it was at 69. Nice job there, Kefka. But really, he's not seeing a ton of play when we can compare him specifically to Bradley, who's seeing 218 times on offense and then 234 on defense. He's definitely seeing more, or Bradley's definitely seeing more play. And it's important to compare these two because what I haven't mentioned yet is that these are both 100 cost units. So I can't believe I haven't said that yet in this video, but Kefka's a 100 cost unit. That is, there's a specific power level that's expected with that. And we can definitely see that he's not being used nearly as much as Bradley. He's not on the same power level. I feel pretty comfortable saying that. I think Kefka is a very powerful unit, but he's just not as impactful on the meta as Bradley has been and will be for quite a while. But at the same time, we can still take a look at what people are doing on this side. We can scroll down and we can see some attack teams, and they're very similar on both sides here. So Kefka being mixed in with evasion is very interesting. If he gives these two units, King Mont and Yuffie, some hate, then that's great. Then they will be attacked instead of him. Yuffie will dodge and King Mont will tank. When we look at Sorrow and Yuffie getting some hate again, they can dodge while Kefka stays back and kind of survives. And there's a similar theme. We see Hio here with Rain, probably a great sword team, which is very interesting to me, and then some more evasion teams. So it seems like the main place that he's being used is actually as a partner for evade setups, whereas we can see on the down here at the very bottom, we see our first Roy team here, which is Roy and Kefka and King Mont. So really, we're not seeing a ton of glove team usage just yet, but there's always a possibility for that in the future. Okay, so with all of that said, should you be pulling for Kefka a 100 cost fire unit? Probably not. After all that, probably not. I mean, depends. So for me, I'm going to be pulling for him because I love fire units. I think he's actually really cool. The ability to give people hate and all his AoE resistance is very strong. He's a very strong unit. Lots of units are very strong. I thought Roy was a very strong unit, but should a lot of people pull for him? I mean, I don't know, because he has issues with barriers. Kefka's going to have issues with barriers. I just think what we're looking at here is a unit that is going to bleed us dry, and then we're going to get a little bit more non-limited stuff, and then maybe an Addison unit, maybe a global exclusive. And for people that are really stretched, they're either not able to pull for him, or maybe they are able to, but then they will definitely leave them stretched for what's to come. So I think he is a pretty safe skip for a lot of people. He's not being used a ton in JP, but as it always goes in War of the Visions, you have to make your own decisions, because there are units that see play in all levels by very good team builders, and he's absolutely a good unit, just like most units are in War of the Visions. But if I'm recommending him to a large player base and I have to make a general recommendation, it is that you skip Kefka, that maybe if you don't have her, you grab Celas. You definitely upgrade and transcend your Final Fantasy VI units. You enjoy their master ability 2s. But if you are dedicated fire main, if you are looking to do something with gloves, the glove compositions, then yes, Kefka is going to be a very interesting unit for you. All right, so that's going to be it for me. Let me know how I did in the comments down below. Did you enjoy the video, and was it useful for you? What are your plans on Wednesday? I myself am actually going to be out at a baseball game, so I won't be pulling on Wednesday at all, because I would like to do that on camera for you all to see. So I'll be pulling on stream on Thursday instead. So it's going to be very difficult for me to wait a full day. I don't know how I will find the willpower, but that's the crazy things that you do for your viewers. So hope you can all join me on Thursday, and then otherwise I'll see you all soon in another video.